أشرقت نفسي بنور من فؤادي حينما
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين. Assalamu alaikum everybody. Thank you for joining us on behalf of Jamaica Muslim Center Youth. I'd like to welcome everyone here tonight. Just before beginning the program, the Ticket to Healing, I'd just like to give a short, brief background on JMC Youth. Alhamdulillah, we're a group of brothers and sisters trying to promote Islamic awareness and benefit the community in different various ways through our events and activities. Alhamdulillah, by the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we've been able to hold many events and activities, even during this period of COVID, the last year or so. Alhamdulillah, we've been trying our best to hold different activities, and tonight's program, inshallah, won't be any different. As you can see, the Ticket to Healing. You can follow us on our Instagram at jmc_org. You can follow us on our Facebook, facebook.com/jmcofficial, and our YouTube channel. Inshallah, we'll put this up there as well, Jamaica Muslim Center on YouTube. So before we introduce our guests tonight, we'd just like to begin with some recitation of the Qur'an from our brother Hafiz Sajjad. Hafiz Sajjad, if you can do the honors. Jazakallah khair.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم آمن الرسول بما أنزل إليه من ربه والمؤمنون كل آمن بالله وملائكته وكتبه ورسله لا نفرق بين أحد من رسله وقالوا سمعنا وأطعنا غفرانك ربنا وإليك المصير لا يكلف الله نفسا إلا وسعها لها ما كسبت وعليها ما اكتسبت ربنا لا تؤاخذنا إن نسينا أو أخطأنا ربنا ولا تحمل علينا إصرا كما حملته على الذين من قبلنا ربنا ولا تحملنا ما لا طاقة لنا به واعف عنا واغفر لنا وارحمنا أنت مولانا فانصرنا على القوم الكافرين صدق الله العظيم.
Jazakallah khairan, brother Hafiz Sajjad. So let's begin. Alhamdulillah, today we're honored to partner with Heal Collective NY to discuss understanding depression and suicide prevention, how to help those who are struggling mentally. Just a brief background on the Heal Collective. Heal Collective NY is a group of volunteers that are working to provide general information and education relating to mental health and mental health conditions and how they impact different communities. You can visit them on healcollectiveny.org. You can follow them on Facebook, The Heal Collective, and on Instagram at Heal Collective NY. Our guests from Heal Collective are Sister Bisma Anwar and Brother Omar Shareef. Bisma Anwar is a licensed mental health counselor. She has a Master of Education and a Master of Arts degree in Psychological Counseling from Teachers College, Columbia University. She has done workshops on various mental health issues and has extensive experience counseling children, teens, and adults from different backgrounds and helping them deal with various life issues. She also has a podcast called, if I'm pronouncing it right, Therapachino, where she addresses various issues related to mental health. I believe you can follow that on Instagram as well. Omar Shareef is an MD/MBA combined degree graduate from St. George's University School of Medicine. He is a certified adult mental health first aid instructor and dedicates himself to advocating and promoting mental health wellness and literacy in underserved Black, Indigenous, people of color, and faith-based communities. So without further ado, inshallah, I'd just like to hand it off to our guests, and the floor is theirs. Jazakumullah khairan.
Okay. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, everybody. I'd like to thank everyone for joining us tonight for this event. There's a lot of things you could be doing on a Saturday night. And I know after a whole year of this, everyone's sort of Zoom fatigued by this point because literally everything you've been doing has been on Zoom. So I really do want to give a special thank you to JMC Youth for hosting Bisma and give a thank you to you guys as well for joining us tonight for what is a very heavy and difficult topic, but hopefully something, inshallah, that both Bisma and I will do our best to try and demystify and give to you in a way that's really palatable. So my hope for tonight are a few things. The first is that we'll do our best, inshallah, to help define what depression is, what are the different theories behind where we feel depression can come from, what does depression manifest as when someone has it, what are the different intensities and levels of depression someone can have, and then, of course, what types of therapies and treatments are available to help mitigate when someone does have depression, and how do you access a lot of those treatments and therapies. So this is sort of the gist of what Bisma and I are going to be touching upon tonight. I do want to give one warning, though, and this is a disclaimer, which is that the topics that she and I are going to be touching upon tonight are going to be a bit difficult for some folks, and for a few in the audience, it may be triggering. We will touch upon suicidality. We will touch upon the topics of suicide. We will touch upon severe depression. We may touch upon other mental health related topics adjacent to that. So if at any point tonight you feel uncomfortable with what we're going to be discussing, or a topic comes up that makes you feel a certain emotional reaction, the recommendation that both Bisma and I have is to step away from this lecture, actually. You can either exit the event if you want, or you can close your screen, you can minimize, mute, whatever it is that you want to do to give yourself a little bit of time and space to collect yourself. And if you feel comfortable enough joining us again, you absolutely can. If at any point anything said tonight does elicit a strong reaction from you, and you do wish to speak to either one of us afterwards about what happened, both Bisma and I will provide our contact information afterwards, and you can feel free to reach out at any point to help debrief or discuss, or have us refer you to someone if need be. So that's just my quick disclaimer from my end. For today's discussion, inshallah, I'm going to be focusing a lot more on the clinical aspect of depression and its treatment. This is from my background as a psychiatrist. And I'll hand it over to Bisma to give her part.
Sure. Jazakallah. Happy to be here and talking with all of you about this, as Omar said, heavy topic. But I think Omar said it right with, giving that disclaimer. I think that's really important, especially when we're talking about these things. It is important to talk about them, but it's also important to allow ourselves space if we're having a difficult time with the content. So just to start us off with some definition around like what is depression. So depression is a mental illness that ultimately causes sadness, causes low mood. It negatively impacts our thoughts, feelings, and emotions. And it has a lot to do with our loss of interest in activities that we once enjoyed. So feeling like you're unable to really live your life the way that you were living it, the inability to be able to take care of your daily responsibilities, and unable to function as you normally do in the world in terms of your responsibilities, once again, whether it's school or work or taking care of your family, whatever it is that you normally do is like impacted by depression. And one thing to also understand about depression, there is the emotion of feeling depressed, and then there is the mental illness that is major depressive disorder, depression for short. And what we're mainly focusing on today is the mental illness. So what is called major depressive disorder, but we are going to refer to it for the purpose of this discussion as depression. And the reason why I'm making that differentiation, though, for all of you is to really understand that all feel, maybe there'll be a day where we feel like, oh, I feel depressed today, but that doesn't mean that we have depression. And because if you are actually fitting the description of being depressed in a clinical sense, that means that you are experiencing these symptoms for at least a period of more than 2 weeks to a few months. So that's something to just sort of keep in mind as we're talking about this. There's definitely some risk factors involved, right, that make a person more likely to develop depression. One of those are biochemistry, which have to do with, certain chemicals in the brain. Not going to go deeply into that. I'm not a neuroscientist, so just to kind of keep it very simple, is sometimes it just has to do with an imbalance in our brain, and maybe Omar can add to this a little bit later on, if he would like. And then another big factor is genetics. So if depression runs in your family, if you have, relatives close to you or within your immediate family who have suffered from depression, then that's another risk factor to develop depression for you. Personality, certain personality factors, such as someone with low self-esteem, someone who gets overwhelmed by stress, has this sort of difficulty managing their emotions, and have this sense of, like, when we talk about low self-esteem, it's sort of these ideas of like, I'm not good enough, I can't handle this, I am unable to take this, I can't really deal with this. So sort of things like along those lines. And then environmental, which is potentially an exposure to violence, abuse, neglect, poverty. These are things that make people more vulnerable. One thing that we're seeing right now that is environmental is COVID. So that's obviously something to think about as well. As we have gone over this past year, there have been a lot more people that have been diagnosed with depression. And a big part of that reason is the risk factor of experiencing either going through COVID themselves or just being a part of this pandemic and having to, deal with loss in many different types of ways, whether it's financial, whether it's, whether it's loss of just a lifestyle, being able to live your life in a certain way, being able to do the things that you enjoy or like to do. And that, kind of all has been really changed and taken away. So we've had to adjust our lives in many different ways. So that's been something that has been really tough for us to deal with over this past year. And so I'm going to stop here, and I'm going to actually hand it over to Omar.
Thank you. So like Bisma had mentioned, there's a lot of different theories for where depression can come from. And a lot of folks tend to ask themselves, well, if nothing is going bad or wrong in my life, everything seems fine, why am I feeling this way? Why do I feel so sad? Why do I feel so hopeless? Why do I feel so worthless? Why is it happening out of nowhere? And this is where we have the theory of neurochemicals. Neurochemicals meaning the neurons in your brain use certain chemicals to communicate with each other. And they send those signals using certain chemicals. And one of the chemicals that they use to communicate is called serotonin. Serotonin is known as like a happy chemical. Whenever the neurons communicate using this signal, they're essentially communicating that something good or something has happened that makes you feel good, that makes you feel energetic, that makes you feel hopeful, that makes you feel goal-oriented, that you're thinking about the future, you're thinking about other things. When there's a lack of that chemical, there isn't enough of it being a signal between neurons, this is what we call like a neurologic version of depression, that everything in your life can go right, but neurologically something's off, and this now manifests as depression. One of the things that Bisma and I do our best to try and dispel, and this is very, very important, is the stigma that depression comes from or is the result of a lack of iman. That you being a bad Muslim, you not praying, you not making dua, or you not engaging in enough ibadah or enough dhikr, in some way, shape, or form lowers your iman, and low iman now results in clinical depression. And this is wrong for a few reasons. The first is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, our belief about Allah is that He is Ar-Rahman. He is the most merciful. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not inflict disease upon people as a form of punishment. The reason being is because in Islam we learn that a thorn prick, just a mere thorn prick, is expiation for sin. And that when the body is inflicted with some sort of difficulty, it's a trial upon you. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala puts trials on people. Some people have different trials. For some, their trial is physical. They have a physical illness. They perhaps fell and broke their leg. And because their leg is fractured, they can't pray anymore. They have to sit in a chair and pray the whole time. Their wheelchair, they now have to sit in a wheelchair for, a few months while their leg recovers. This is a difficulty and a trial that they have, but you wouldn't point at a person who broke their leg and say that your leg is broken because you're a bad Muslim. The logic doesn't make sense. In the same way, the treatment of that broken leg is also not vested in that, where you go to a doctor and you tell the doctor, I broke my leg. Doctor, what's the solution? The doctor is not going to tell you, oh, sit down and read this surah and read this surah and make dua and your leg will get better again. You take the medical degree away from that doctor because you would say, what kind of doctor are you? That's not treatment. You need to actually treat the leg. In Islam, we're taught this beautiful piece of hikmah, wisdom, which is that you tie your camel and then you place your faith in Allah. You don't merely just place your faith in Allah and do nothing about it. So when it comes to physical illness, the expectation we have is that you go to the doctor, you get a proper cast put around that leg, you make sure you get crutches so you don't put weight on that leg, and you allow the leg time to heal. And when the leg is healed, the entire process, through this whole process, people are making dua for you, you are reading Qur'an, you are making sure that you beseech Allah for quick healing, for shifa, you do all of that. But you tied your camel, you got treatment for it. Depression works the same way. Instead of a broken leg, instead of a fractured bone, consider this to be a fracture of your emotions. Something emotionally, something psychologically has been broken, has been fractured. And this now results in depression. So the treatment for depression, same as a broken leg, is that you tie your camel, you go and seek out professional mental health care from someone like Bisma, who's a therapist, or someone like myself, who's a psychiatrist. Sometimes it might need medication. Sometimes it might need psychotherapy. Whatever the case is, you make sure to tie your camel, and then you place your faith in Allah. And this is what my 2 cents are for tonight. That if you take anything from tonight's event, it's this, which is that if you see someone hurting, you see someone suffering in silence or suffering emotionally, keep in mind that the solution to their problem may be professional help, that they might need to see a Muslim mental health professional in order to get help for that. It's not merely just a matter of throwing some ayahs or throwing some hadith at them and then expecting some magic solution to happen. It doesn't work that way. As Muslims, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us a sense of hikmah that we seek treatment and we seek healing, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created a cure for every single illness except for one, and that one is death. But for everything else, there is treatment. And for mental illness and depression in particular, there is treatment. And this is what I beseech upon everyone tonight, to seek that treatment out if you yourself or if someone you know may be suffering from this. So I'm going to end on this note and then pass it to Bisma, which is, clinically speaking, what does depression actually look like when someone is suffering from it? I'm going to give you a few symptoms, but do keep in mind that when it comes to depression, depression is not exactly all of these symptoms together, or only 1 or 2 of them. Depression is sort of a constellation of symptoms. Some people have depression that looks a different way. You can have 20 different people, all of them with depression, and each person will have a different type and form of depression. Meaning sometimes for some folks it's more intense, for some folks not as intense. For some folks it's a long episode, weeks or months at a time. Other folks, years at a time. For some folks, just weeks, days or weeks, they can go through a depressive episode. It's very different for a lot of people, but generally speaking, In terms of clinical depression, major depressive disorder, you look for disturbances in sleep, either sleeping too much or not sleeping at all, insomnia. Next is a loss of interest in things that used to make you happy. Bisma touched upon this, which is that you used to find things pleasurable. You used to have hobbies that you'd like, but now you don't find any pleasure in them at all. There's nothing happy in what you're doing. Next is that you can have extreme guilt, lots of guilt weighing you down over things you may or may not have done. Next up is low energy. You don't feel like you have any energy anymore to do anything, something sapping and draining your energy. Next up is your concentration. You can't focus on your work anymore. You can't focus on school anymore. You can't focus at your job. Something's breaking your attention inside. Next up is you feel very sluggish and slow, as if someone has tied weights around your legs and your hands, and it's almost feeling like you're dragging your body instead of moving your body. Or sometimes when you're lying in bed, it seems as if there's weights holding you down in bed and you can't even get out of bed to do what you need to do. And then the last part is going to be your appetite. Some people eat too much when they're depressed. Some people don't eat at all when depressed, but you're going to see a fluctuation in someone's appetite. The final symptom, and this is the most major symptom, is going to be suicidality. And what we mean by suicidality is that for some folks, you can have passive thoughts. What we mean by passive is that you don't actively want to die, but at the same time, you have very little pushing you to live. You're hoping that something in some way, shape, or form, in some accident, takes your life. The next is going to be active suicidality, where you want to hurt yourself and you want to die, and you're searching for ways to do it. And then the final part of it, the most extreme part of it, is when you have a thought of killing yourself, you have an urge, a strong urge to do it, and you've prepared a way in order to take your life. You've done something to prepare yourself to do it. You have an active plan in order to take your life. And this is the most extreme version of suicidal thought. All of this together that I told you guys about, all these symptoms that I just listed, are all symptoms of major depressive disorder. You don't have to have all of them to get the diagnosis, but a majority of them are what we usually look for. If this sounds like you, what I've described, or this sounds like someone you know, there may possibly be a risk that they do have suicide. I am not asking anyone here to go diagnose anybody. If you're not a clinician, you absolutely cannot do this. But if you have a suspicion for yourself or someone that you know, this is the time tonight to reach out to a professional and to start asking for help, professional help. So with that being said, I pass it on to Bisma.
Yes, thank you, Omar, for that. And yeah, I think the understanding of the relationship between depression and suicidality, and sort of the breakdown that Omar gave of like what is suicidal thoughts, how does that sort of look, and how does that escalate, and how that can become worse. I know we've talked a lot about like symptoms, we've talked a lot about depression, we've talked a lot about like what the symptoms are, the risk factors, what it is. I want to bring in a little bit about like what are things that people can do to cope. And one of the first things to think about is what I do is therapy. So therapy refers to, it's known as therapy, it's known as talk therapy, it's known as mental health counseling. There's like, it's used in different ways, but the idea is really to be able to go to a professional when you are experiencing these symptoms that Omar was talking about, and you realize that you need help. That's the point where you reach out for help and you go to a therapist and you talk about and start talking about what's going on and how you're feeling and what are the symptoms you're experiencing. What are certain, maybe like the risk factors that I was mentioning earlier? Are there any risk factors that are touching upon your life right now that are making you feel worse? How is your life different right now as opposed to like a year ago, right? Why are you depressed now at this point in your life? That's something for a lot of us, it's, this sense of not being as aware, right? So when we go to therapy, what it helps us do is also develop a self-awareness. And with self-awareness comes insight into our own thoughts, feelings, and emotions, where we can actually start to make connections between things that are happening in the environment and how they're impacting us. And we call those triggers. So that's something that, one of the first things that you start to really recognize as you go to therapy and as you really talk about what's happening is that you start to see these connections in your life. And it might remind you of something that happened in the past, but how that might be something that you're still healing from. It might be something that if something in the environment reminds you of that time in your life, that can cause you to also, again, feel worse, feel depressed, bring up a lot of negative thoughts, feelings, and emotions. And that can also contribute to a feeling of depression. So sometimes it's not always very obvious about why we're feeling this way. But once again, you want to notice the symptoms, and then you start to like look at things and then pull back and then start to become more mindful. So that's things that you're going to be able to learn when you go to therapy. And I say all of this because I know that a lot of people are like, well, why would I just go to a stranger to talk about my problems? Why can't I just talk to a friend? And the thing is that, yes, you can talk to your friends. You should talk to your friends and your family about what you're feeling and experiencing, but they are not professionals who can help you, right? Again, it's like what Omar was saying about, like, if if something happened to your physical health, right? You wouldn't go to your family to get, a solution to that, right? That they wouldn't be able to help you. You would go to a doctor. So it's the same idea, really, is that we can get support from people around us, but ultimately, in order to heal, in order to get better, we do need to involve a professional. And, I'm obviously focusing on the therapy aspect, and I'm going to continue to talk a little bit more about that. And Omar is going to be bringing up how medication can be helpful and, psychiatry. So if you went to him, if you were experiencing symptoms, like, he will talk more about what that would look like. So in talk therapy, there's also a lot of different types of therapy. So it can be something like cognitive behavioral therapy. Some of you might have heard of it. And it really is, the idea behind cognitive behavioral therapy is that you focus on thought patterns, negative thought patterns, and how those contribute to your feelings. So the connection between thoughts and feelings is looked at and analyzed, and you start to recognize what are your negative thinking habits. And then you're able to connect those to what are your negative behaving habits. So that connection between the thoughts and the behaviors also then starts to be more highlighted, and you start to understand what that connection looks like for you. When you're feeling a certain way, what type of behavior are you engaging in? And that is what the idea is behind CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy. Another type of therapy is dialectical behavioral therapy, which is DBT for short. And this one is a little bit different because it focuses more on the emotional piece and the connection of emotions with behavior. And so it's like slightly different. Another thing that I think becomes really important for us to understand is the connection between physical health and mental health, and how one can impact the other, right? There is a mind-body connection. And I'm sure that you all have probably noticed that when, and even when Omar was talking about the symptoms, right? Feeling like really tired, feeling burdened, feeling like you can't get up in the morning. Those are all physical symptoms in a way, right? Your body is experiencing this, but there's that connection to your mind that's going on there. And so that is something also to keep in mind for all of us, is that when we take care of our mental health and physical health, we get better results, right? So it obviously, like, if you're feeling depressed and you're going to therapy, You also want to think about, what can I do to improve my physical health? So eating healthy, exercising, either it's doing some form of exercise, working out, going to the gym, or even just going for a walk. You know, these are simple things and simple ways in which we can take care of our physical health as well. And that in turn, you know, when you think about it, when you work out or you go to the gym and you come back, and or you've gone for a run, and you know, you release, you know, it releases the endorphins and you feel good about yourself, you feel happy, you feel good. Same thing with when you're eating healthy too. You just, you know, you feel better about yourself, you feel good about yourself, that you're nurturing your body with good food. So sort of like putting that in there for all of us to sort of understand that there's not just one thing, and we all need to like sort of find what works best for us. And it's not a one size fits all, but these are main things that if you start to work on these things, then it starts to become easier. And then you kind of really work through what are certain things that can particularly help you cope, which have to do with a lot of the things that we find pleasure in, right? So one of the, you know, impacts of depression is that there's a loss of interest in activities that we once enjoyed. So part of it is also trying to get ourselves to re-engage in those things that gave us joy, right? That made us feel happy. If you like to color, paint, do some form of art or creativity, writing, reading, maybe you like to cook, maybe you like to bake. And now, because you're feeling depressed, you're not really finding yourself doing any of these things. So I think kind of like re-engaging in those things, whether you find an accountability partner, whether you do it with someone, you get a family member or a friend to join you so that you can get a little bit of a push. Or if you're one of those people that feel like, you know, on your own, you can sort of really, you know, have this accountability to yourself that, oh, okay, I'm going to start to do things for myself so that I can feel good. One of the things that I end up talking a lot about with my clients is self-care. And the idea behind self-care is really things that we do on a day-to-day basis that are not things that we have to do when we're necessarily going through something, right? For example, if someone who is depressed, you're doing things from a perspective of coping. Now, if you're not depressed, but you still, let's say you have low moods at times, or, you know, because of COVID, there's been times when you've just felt down and you felt hopeless about things. Self-care is something that is kind of like vitamins. You know, we take vitamins before we get sick, right? They're preventative. We take medications when we're actually sick. So if you're actually feeling depressed, you're going to use coping skills. And if you're not, then you're going to use self-care, which is like your vitamins. And you do that so that you're preventing yourself from getting to a place of feeling depressed. And that's why I always encourage people to have some form of self-care. And you could be like, well, what does that look like? And again, for each of us, that will look different. You know, we can all think of things in our life that give us, you know, a sense of relaxation, a sense of peace, something that helps us like sort of just disconnect from the stressors in our life. It's sort of like that me time that we give ourselves, you know, whether it's like 10 minutes in the day, 15 minutes, it doesn't matter. It's just something that we are doing purely for ourselves and purely for the sake of our mental health, you know, and sort of moving forward with that intention. So these are, you know, some of the ways of coping that I want to bring forth to you guys, and I'll hand it over to Omar now.
Thank you, Bisma. So I know one of the scarier things to talk about are psych medications. I completely understand why some people, when they hear this word, the immediate association you have is that, oh, for treating this, for treating anxiety, for treating depression, for treating bipolarity, for treating a lot of mental illnesses, you have to take psych medications. And the first association any of you have when you hear this word is that you think it's for people who are crazy. Only crazy people take these medications. the ones you see on like the subway who are like talking to themselves or shouting and screaming or acting like bizarre on like the streets of the city when you go out. You associate those people who need psych medications and not yourself. And what I would argue to you is that for myself as a psychiatrist, it's my job as a doctor to offer you medications that can help you for whatever it is that you're suffering with. And psych medications in particular have an entire range that we have available for you. It's not just antipsychotics that people are thinking about. And yes, there are antipsychotic medications, but when it comes to things that are like depression that affects your mood, we tend to offer a different type of medication. And this type of medication is an antidepressant. Now, most antidepressants that you hear about, you usually see commercials on TV about antidepressants. They're very common. They're actually the #1 most prescribed medication in the United States are antidepressants, more than antibiotics. You would imagine that that's probably the most things doctors prescribe, but it's not. It's antidepressants. They're extremely common medications that we prescribe. And remember what I told you guys in the very beginning, which is that when nerves want to communicate with each other, like the nerves in your brain, neurons want to communicate, they send serotonin as their signal to one another. So what these medications do when I offer an antidepressant is it boosts the level of serotonin in your brain. That's essentially what the medication does. It boosts that signal of serotonin between your brain neurons. When you boost that signal, all of the symptoms that I described earlier, where you can have sleep problems, where you have lack of interest in things, lots of guilt, excessive guilt, low energy, you feel very sluggish and slow, you've lost interest in certain things, your appetite is fluctuating, you're having suicidal thoughts, all of these symptoms can be mitigated. We can actually treat these symptoms with antidepressant medications. It's actually very important that you seek out medications when your symptoms are severe enough. There are lots of folks who do come to me and they say, you know, Dr. Shareef, I'm feeling really depressed. You know, I think I might need treatment. And I'll be honest with you, some of them don't need medications. Their depression is more mild, or their depression may be moderate, or their depression is something more episodic. It's just one episode of depression. And this is where I would hand it off to Bisma, where they would benefit a lot more from just talk therapy or a specific type of therapy or having some coping mechanisms in place. Now, for some people who have moderate or severe depression, where there's a lot more symptoms and the symptoms are more severe and are impacting them every single day of their lives, or having difficulty functioning because of how bad these symptoms are, these folks are the ones that I offer medications to help them. Now, there's a big misconception when it comes to psych medications, and people believe that if you get caught taking psych medications at all, they think you're crazy, they think something's wrong with you, you're pagal, you're majnoon, you know, is what people, the accusations they would throw against you. There's a heavy stigma against you yourself as a person. What would my family think if they see me taking these kind of medications? What would my friends think? What would my parents think if they saw me taking this? And what I would tell you is that when you come to seek treatment with like Bisma or myself or any sort of professional, if you are over the age of 18, your treatment is entirely private. Nobody else is allowed to know what you discuss with us, what kind of treatments we offer, what you're taking and what you're doing, unless you yourself open up and tell someone that you're doing this or that you're seeking this kind of treatment. We keep confidentiality, and that's a professional thing that we do when it comes to the mental health field. So anyone who has apprehensions about this, of what if people find out, what if people know, I respect and I appreciate that. I do. I would not go and reveal to everybody that you're receiving treatment with me or that I'm recommending medications for you. And that being said, if I do offer you antidepressant medication, keep in mind that this is just like if I offered you painkillers, or if I offered you antibiotics, or if I offered you any other type of medication. Do keep in mind that this is not a replacement for therapy. Just because you're popping pills from me does not mean you don't do therapy or that you don't need anything else and that you don't need coping mechanisms. These medications will help mitigate symptoms, but it's still imperative upon you to make sure that you do everything else needed. Like Bisma had mentioned, seeking coping skills and seeking out therapy for yourself. My strongest recommendation is that if you truly want to treat depression, medications can help. Yes, they can help with symptoms, but ultimately to get to the root of where your depression is coming from, therapy is key. I would strongly recommend therapy. And if you feel that your deen has taken a hit because of your depression, if you feel that spiritually speaking, you feel fluctuations and you feel difficulty as a result of your depression, then what I can tell you is this, which is that seeking help, seeking medications from me, or seeking therapy from Bisma does not mean that you've turned your back on Allah or you've turned your back on your deen and are seeking out alternative treatments that are not making dua or praying salah. The recommendations that Bisma and I have are actually to do that stuff, because for a lot of Muslims, partaking in dua, making dua regularly, praying regularly, dhikr, ibadah, these sort of things are therapeutic. They are self-care for a lot of people. Not for everyone. For some folks, these things can be triggering. For some folks, it may be that their mental illness or that their depression may be the result of a difficult environment involving other Muslims, or involving a toxic way that the deen may have been presented to them, or an abusive way that the deen may be presented to them. This doesn't fault the deen at all. It faults people around them that may be bad influences. And when you're in therapy with Bisma and I, especially when you're with a Muslim therapist, it's important to help tease that apart and keep in mind that one of them is a clinical illness and the other is your spiritual health. And both are important to me. I want to make sure that clinically you are well, and at the same time, spiritually, you are well too. So I will hold one hand and the imam will hold the other, and together we bring you to wellness. That's the critical part. Don't just only seek an imam's help, make sure to talk to your doctor. And vice versa, don't only just go talk to your doctor, make sure you also talk to your imam or whoever you trust about the spiritual aspect of your care as well. That way you target your holistic health and not just specifically your physical or specifically your mental. So that's my 2 cents when it comes to medications. They are not scary. They're not what people think that they are. We offer these medications to help you heal and to help you get better again.
Yeah, thank you, Omar, for clarifying that. I think you're right. There's a lot of misconceptions around medication. And, for me too, when, this is sort of just something that I've seen, a lot of people, they start off with therapy and then I see that there's someone who could benefit from medication. But at times I'm very hesitant to make that, comment to them or give them that recommendation that maybe you should schedule an appointment with a psychiatrist and look into your options. And, sometimes people take it well, and sometimes people are like, no, I don't want to take medication. And I think that has a lot to do with the fact that there is a lot of, misinformation around medication. And so I think, it speaks to the fact that, talk to the professional, don't make assumptions, don't go off what people are telling you, go and talk to the professionals who know what's in these medications, how they can impact you, what the side effects are, and get all of your information from there, not from Google or not from anyone else. So just want to put that out there.
Thank you. So the last thing Bisma and I are going to be touching upon, and then we're going to wrap it up after that, and we'll have Q&A afterwards. The final topic is going to be suicidality. This is a really, really heavy one, but I do want you guys to bear with us for this. So I briefly touched upon suicidality earlier, which is that we define suicidality as intrusive thoughts in your head about wanting to die or being obsessed with death in a way that is not, I have to clarify it, because as Muslims, we are reminded of death, yes, and that death is the destroyer of pleasures. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala teaches us that death can be a very humbling and sobering reminder for us about our akhirah and preparing for our akhirah. Absolutely. But this is a very healthy way of looking at death. It's because you use the concept of your mortality and death in a way that benefits you. It makes you feel like, okay, you know what, my iman has felt a rush as a result of this. I feel like I want to do more. I want to pray more. I want to be better. I want to work on that. For some people, it doesn't have that effect. For some people, it's actually something where you mention death or you mention mortality or you mention dying, and for them, it becomes something intrusive. They can't let go of that thought. It's something that even when they're doing something regular that has nothing at all to do with anything, they have thoughts in their head that cross their mind about wanting to die, about having an urge to do something to hurt themselves, or not wanting to live anymore, not seeing a point or purpose in their life, or being in a situation that is so negative, so difficult, so challenging for them, emotionally and physically, that they don't see any other option available for them except dying, taking their life. And this is why we classify this as a psychopathology, as a mental health challenge, because for someone suffering from depression, they don't see the same things that we see. You would think to yourself in your mind, why would someone kill themselves? It makes no sense to me. I don't understand why somebody would do that. But when you're suffering, when you're in the throes of suffering, when you have all of the symptoms that I described, where nothing in your life is giving you pleasure anymore, you can't even wake up out of bed anymore, simple things that other people can do just like that, you can't do just like that. It's a struggle for you just to do simple, basic tasks. And even when you do those simple, basic tasks, there is no pleasure. There's nothing in it that gives you a sense of satisfaction. It's as if emotionally you are in turmoil inside. There's a huge hurricane of emotions inside, and you can't feel a stable sense of yourself. This is what we describe as mental illness. And because you are suffering internally like this, you don't see any other option other than, I can't live like this. This can't be like this. And oftentimes what we believe, and this is an unfortunate thing, and again, another misconception that Bisma and I will clear up, is that when you sit with someone who may be suffering from suicidal thoughts, a lot of people tend to believe that if you say, hey, are you having thoughts of dying? Hey, are you having thoughts of suicide? You're like Leonardo DiCaprio, and somehow you'll like incept it into their head, and they'll think, oh yeah, I'm definitely going to do that. That's exactly what I want to do. It doesn't work like that. Suicide does not work like that. Someone who has been having suicidal thoughts will struggle with suicidal thoughts every single day, multiple times a day. You asking them the direct question is you finally being able to have them open up about what it is that they're suffering from. Now, this is a very important conversation to have, which is how do you actually have a talk with someone who you feel is suffering from depression and maybe suicidal? The first thing I'm going to say is that this is the time where you open up your heart, but you shut your mouth. This is not a time for you to pontificate. This is not a time for you to talk. This is not a time for you to throw ayahs and throw hadith. You're not at a minbar. You're not giving a khutbah. This is not a time for that. It's not a time for that. Right now, someone is in crisis and someone is suffering. It's the equivalent of, say, someone getting into a car accident on the road and they're inside their car while the car is smoking and there's fire in the car, and you're rolling the window down and saying, hey, can I tell you a really nice hadith? This is not the time to say the hadith right now. Get them out of the car, pull them out, get them to safety, and now have a conversation with them about what happened and what went wrong. And then once you get them to a point where they're more stable, they're more calm, they're in a place of peace and harmony with themselves, now you can have a conversation about that stuff. So think of it this way in that analogy, that when someone is suffering from suicidality, this is not the time to throw a lot of spiritualism at them. This is not the time to do that. What you need right now is to open up your ears and your heart and listen. Ask questions and ask them, how are you feeling? How difficult is this for you? How strong are these urges that you're having? Do you feel that you need help? Can I take you somewhere to talk to someone? Would you like me to set up an appointment for you? If you feel that they are acutely suicidal, they're going to do something now to hurt themselves, or they're brandishing something sharp, or they're telling you a specific plan that I'm going to take my life at this point, at this time, this is considered a psychiatric emergency. In this particular case, you usually call 911 or you call mobile crisis and you have them brought to an ER. And in the ER, someone like myself, a psychiatrist, will then evaluate them and then make a decision either to let them go with an appointment or to keep them inside the hospital if they're psychiatrically unstable, mentally unstable. So I know this is a very scary thing what I'm throwing out there, but this is a crisis moment. I hope, inshallah, no one here is ever in a crisis moment, but do keep this in mind that if you ever find yourself in this moment where someone is opening up about their suicidal thoughts, remember to keep this in mind, that don't judge, do not judge. Your job here is not to judge them. Your job here is not to tell them that this will lead to hellfire, this is haram. This is not the time for that. They're not asking for a mufti or a faqih in this point. What they're asking for is a friend. That's what they're asking for. So in this particular case, leave your fatwas at the door and step in with an open heart and simply ask them, what are you hurting and suffering from? How can I help you? This is someone in crisis, a brother and sister in crisis. So treat it as a crisis in this moment. If you have particular questions and concerns about this, please make sure in the Q&A to ask more. Bisma and I can elucidate a bit more on this stuff. But this is what I can tell you, that suicidality is something very scary to deal with, but a lot of people do have suicidal thoughts. It doesn't mean that every single person needs to be locked up for it. Do keep in mind that there's a range of suicidal thoughts. For some folks, they can have passive thoughts, meaning at certain times, at certain places, they'll just have a random thought pop in their head, and it'll be a distressing thought. They'll think to themselves, oh my God, I would never do that. But that's just a passive thought. It doesn't mean anything other than that. For some people, it's a bit more intrusive. They'll have thoughts every so often, recurring thoughts, a lot of thoughts, but they're not going to act on it. They're not going to do anything about it. It's distressing for them. These are the kind of folks who are good candidates for sitting with Bisma and having therapy about what may be the cause of these thoughts, what things are happening in your life that may be causing you to feel depressed or feel anxious or feel this way. And then there are folks that I described that have very, very severe thoughts of suicide, thoughts and urges and plans to do things, to try and hurt themselves. These folks are usually candidates for medication and therapy. They do see a psychiatrist, they do see a therapist. And again, there's nothing wrong about that. They're not crazy, they're not psychotic, none of that. They're simply depressed and suffering. And this treatment, inshallah, can help them when they're in that state. So I do hope that this helps elucidate that. Now for tonight, Bisma and I are not shuyukh. We're not muftis. We can't give you fatwa when it comes to questions like, is suicide haram? Or like, do people commit suicide, go to Jahannam, and all that stuff. These are questions that are more, Islamic in nature. And that's not my job to do. That's out of my lane. I can't speak to that. What I can tell you, though, is that someone who is suffering from depression and someone who is having suicidal thoughts, this is a trial put upon them by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is a very difficult trial upon them. And that the entire point and purpose of why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala puts trials upon people is so that eventually we can overcome it and become better at the end of it, inshallah. And if that means seeking help, if that means seeking treatment, then absolutely do whatever it takes that's within your power and means to do so. And in the same way that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created these trials to put on people, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has also created those who have the tools and resources and means to help people out of trials. And that's what professionals like Bisma and myself are for, to help people reach that treatment, to reach that stage of healing. So anyone who may be hearing me right now and maybe having these sort of thoughts, I know they're very scary thoughts, but there is treatment and healing available for you. There is. I hope, inshallah, that helps elucidate that. Bisma, if I missed anything at all, please make sure to catch me on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think like again, to just sort of go a little bit more into, suicide, talking a little bit more about it. The reason why it's so important to bring this up is, it's really it ranks as the 10th leading cause of death in the United States. And it actually ranks as the second leading cause of death for 15 to 34-year-olds. So that's pretty significant when you think about it. And then you also see that, we're the youth center has called us. And so this is definitely, when we're talking about the youth, this is the second leading cause of death for youth. And that is really significant. And that really shows how much they're suffering. And the suffering is a lot of the times in silence because of so many reasons and factors, and people being afraid to really talk about how they're feeling. And it starts out as depression. Having suicidal thoughts is one of the symptoms of depression. And that's where the start is. But if you are able to get help at the very beginning or in the start of when you start to feel depressed, then you're able to get help that much quicker before you reach that point. A couple of terms that I'm just going to kind of go into the definition of, like sort of what we call the continuum of suicidal behavior. Omar talked about having passive suicidal thoughts. So the term is suicidal ideation, which is really that thoughts of suicide can range in severity from a vague wish to be dead to an active suicidal ideation that has a specific plan or intent. So that is the idea, is that it's a continuum. And the idea is that there is sort of like a spectrum of the severity. And when you're on the lower end of it, you're having more of these vague wishes to be dead. And when it's on the high end of it, that is more to when you're having a specific idea about what you would do to end your life. So that's called suicidal ideation. Then we have the term suicide attempt, right? So that is usually when someone has attempted to end their life, but it wasn't fatal. They actually did not end their life. Their life did not end. There was either some kind of medical intervention, or maybe someone stopped them, a family member or a friend, or a professional, someone who they had shared with what they were going to do, and they were stopped. So that would be an attempt that was actually not completed. And then we have the term suicide, which is death that's caused by self-directed injurious behavior, which is really with the intent to actually die. And the suicide is the result of that. So these are just, some terms for all of you to just continue to understand that there's many aspects of suicide, and it's a very complex thing to understand. And it helps for us to really get a sense of what is happening. So if someone tells you that they wish to die, understanding that, as opposed to someone telling you, I'm having thoughts to, take these pills and overdose, right? And so the understanding will help you realize, like, okay, now maybe this is the point where we need to get help. So the higher you are on the scale of suicidal ideation, the more it is very important that you get help. So that's, something for all of us to think about, whether it's for ourselves or it's for people that we have in our life that we love and we care about, and we wouldn't want anything to happen to them. So as a community, we need to understand these terms, and as individuals, we need to understand these terms. So, all right. And then let's talk a little bit about some risk factors, right? Some risk factors that lead to suicidality. And this is for adolescents and young people to even older people, but sort of having a recent or very serious loss. So suffering through a loss, which could be a death in the family. It could be a separation or divorce or a broken relationship. It could be from low self-esteem. It could be a sense of isolating ourselves from friends and family. It could be a loss of interest in things that usually we really enjoyed doing and we liked doing. Hopelessness, helplessness, guilt, worthlessness. And when we talk about hopelessness, it's the sense of not feeling like you have a future, not feeling like there's anything left for you to look forward to in your life, and not feeling like there's anything left for you to live for. So hopelessness is also something that can come as a result for some people at certain points in their life when they have gone through some trauma. There might be a sense of feeling really hopeless about the future, and that can have a really direct impact on their will to live. Another risk factor could be alcohol or other substance use. It could be certain family history of suicide. If there's anyone else in the family that has completed or attempted suicide, that's also a risk factor. Child abuse or neglect, someone who has been through a traumatic experience like that in childhood is also at higher risk. Someone who has been a victim of bullying, they are also at risk. Someone who has lack of social support, so they have no friends or family, they're very isolated, they live alone, they're not really part of a community, they don't have connections in their community with people. Those people are also a lot at risk. And also people that might have had a previous suicide attempt, or someone who has previously had suicidal thoughts. All these, all these things are certain risk factors that we see when we, when we talk about this. There's certain other things that, have a lot to do with suicidal thoughts and ideation, as I was mentioning. And some of it has to do some of it has to do with the impact of media, of watching the news. When I talk about like that feeling of hopelessness, that feeling of, sort of the impact of what's going on in the environment, right? So the environmental factors of watching the news so much, seeing these stories of people who have gone through trauma, people that have gone through, difficult experiences, whether it's like through crime, whether it's racial discrimination, everything that's been happening in our country right now, and also related to COVID. All these things, as we take in all these things, and as we are more and more exposed to these stories, that also creates a sense of hopelessness and helplessness within us that can also lead to these types of thoughts. So one of the things that I recommend to a lot of my clients is also, you don't always have to watch the news. You don't always have to engage in the news. Oh, but I really want to be informed about what's going on. Yes, it's important to be informed, but there is a line between being informed enough and then being over-informed and being so stimulated by everything that's happening that, it really makes us feel like there's nothing is going right. So the negative side of our thoughts and feelings, everything becomes more negative. And the more we go in that, the worse we start to feel. And it's very hard to actually connect to more positive thoughts and feelings. It's actually very easy for us to engage in more of those negative thoughts and feelings. So that's also something to understand, that can be a risk factor. Another thing is that if, someone in our community has gone through an experience like this, that also has a really big impact on the community as a whole. I think like whenever we hear about someone that either we've interacted with or is just part of our greater community, whether it's the Muslim community or its actual neighbor or our actual neighborhood, it really hits us home. If it's a family member or an extended family member, those things really hit us home. Those things can really have a really deep impact on us. I know for a lot of people who know someone, like later on, they question themselves and they're like, oh, I wish I had seen something. I wish I had noticed. I wish I had known, and I think that, yes, it is sad that we are not able to actually pick up on these things sometimes, but we can't read people's minds, right? We can only be aware of what the warning signs are. We can only educate ourselves, and we can only ask someone if they're okay if they don't seem okay. So I think that's why events like this are so important, because we can all play our part. Each and every single one of us, as we learn things and we educate ourselves about mental health, mental illness, depression, suicidality, the more we are aware of it, the more we understand it, the more we can actually be open to helping others and to actually telling other people as well who don't know more about it. So I think that's also something to really understand when it comes to suicide, that it's not just happening in within someone. It has a really bigger context, within our larger and smaller communities. So yeah, I think, with that, there's also many resources. I want to just mention the suicide hotline. It's the National Suicide Prevention Hotline. And, it's very, you could even Google it. And I know that they're working on a very, on the suicide hotline with like a shorter number. Right now, the number is 1-800-273-TALK. So that's what and it routes you to a crisis center where you can actually talk to someone. Omar mentioned going to the, emergency room and what that looks like. So that's also something. So there are options out there. There are people out there. If you see a therapist or a psychiatrist, tell them. If you see someone like myself or Omar, tell them. If you have a family member or friend, someone you trust, tell them how you feel. Don't stay silent. Don't suffer in silence. That's the one thing that I would really have everybody take away from this, is that we don't have to suffer in silence. There is help out there. We just have to be open to getting it.
That's a beautiful note to end on, Bisma. So I just want to say just a lot clear for that. So yeah, I mean, that's pretty much it from the two of us. I think we covered all of it. For the Q&A, I do want to say that I know some people might have some questions that are very sensitive, or you may want to ask questions that you don't want other people to be aware of. So I know that on Zoom, at the very least, there is a feature where you can send your responses in anonymously when asking a question to the JMC account. So I know the JMC account is here. If you want to send a question but don't want your question to be public and want it more private, we completely understand that. You can send your question specifically to JMC only in Zoom, and then they can give us the question and then we can answer it. So do keep that in mind, please, for Q&A.
Yeah, I think that's how we'll run it. So we do have a couple of questions that came into the chat, and some questions actually came in privately.
Okay.
And throughout the week, we had some people that sent some questions as well leading up to the event. So I'll just try to run through some of them.
Okay.
Obviously, we can't go for too long, but we'll try to get through as many of them as we can.
Okay, inshallah.
All right. So someone asked, there were times when someone would come and start talking to me about their mental health. In times like these, I usually freeze up, or I stay silent, or I try to comfort them somehow or some way or the other. However, is there anything specific I should say or bring up, or how should I go about saying it? I know staying silent is a fundamental key, but what does one do when they're being waited on, or they feel like they're waited on to answer or say something? Any one of you guys could.
Bisma, you want to go for this one, Bisma, or you want me to?
Go ahead, Omar.
You sure?
Yeah.
Okay. So for this particular question, I'm going to say this first and foremost to answer your question. You are not a therapist. It is not your job to be a therapist. You are not a professional. This is not an expectation upon you to do that. Let's take your situation that you asked about and let's give it a different context. Say someone is coming up to you and they're telling you, hey, look at this rash I have. What do you think this rash is? Can I show you this rash a little closer? And every single time you're sitting next to them, all they do is talk about their rash. And you're feeling to yourself, I don't really know much about this. I feel like I'm uncomfortable with this conversation. I know they need help and they keep coming to me for help, but I'm not a dermatologist. I don't know what to tell them. I actually feel anxious whenever they open up to me about this. The first thing to tell yourself and assure yourself of is you are correct. You are not a dermatologist. This is not your specialty. It's not your job to be this person's therapist. It's not. It's your job to bring them to someone who is a therapist, who is a mental health professional and can help them with their mental health problem. So for this person asking this question, if you in your heart feel uncomfortable with this person constantly opening up to you about their mental health issues, first of all, recognize that it's a blessing for them to even be opening up about the mental health issues. It's possible that if you rebuke them in any way, they'll shut down. And then you don't know who they're going to open up to, if they would ever even open up to anyone else. So you have a trusting relationship here between you and this person opening up to you. That's a beautiful thing to have, mashallah. You can offer support when you are capable of offering support. But during the times when you are incapable of offering that support, when you feel burdened, when you feel weighty, when you feel like you don't have the capability to do this, it's perfectly okay to tell this person in this moment, I do apologize, I'm sorry. I can't help you in this moment, but I do know some folks who can. Here's a link you can follow. Here's a list of providers I can give you. Here's the contact information for this event I went to at JMC. There's 2 people that I know from there. Can you please message here? And they'll direct you to someone that you can actually talk to. Or we'll set you up with a therapist who can meet with you week after week and help you with your problems. And then inshallah, when you come to me later and you can tell me, hey, my therapist and I talked about this is what they're saying. What do you think? You'll know in your heart, okay, great. This person is getting professional help. They're getting whatever they need. It's not my burden to bear being their therapist, and it's not my job to be their therapist. I'm simply giving them additional support when they need it. Take care of yourself first and foremost. Okay, a burnt out candle cannot give light to anyone or anything. Take care of your own flame. Take care of your own candle before you start lighting someone else's. When you're on an airplane, what is the one rule they always tell you on the flight? Which is when there's a drop in oxygen pressure in the cabin, the masks will drop from the ceiling. Secure your own mask before you help the person next to you with theirs. So keep this in mind for yourself. Do keep this in mind. A lot of people burn themselves out doing this. And unfortunately, it creates an even bigger mental health issue when you have someone who is reaching out for help and the other person feeling either some sort of reciprocal anxiety or depression as a result of it. And now you have an even bigger problem than just one person being affected. So to this question, my answer is first and foremost, recognize yourself and your own limitations. 1, 2, take care of yourself in this situation. And 3, get that person to professional help for themselves. I hope, inshallah, that's a sufficient enough answer.
Okay, Jazakallah khair. Let's take the next one that we have. How can we help someone who we know has thoughts about taking their life or harming themselves because of different problems at home, but you can't really help them completely? The issue could be with their parents, for example. They may be underage, they're not 18 yet. So what can you do? Are you allowed to take them, or do they need parental consent? What do you do in that situation when they're underage and they might be struggling?
So for me to just kind of clarify and understand, take them, meaning take them to therapy or take them to the emergency room?
The question is pretty vague. It doesn't mention specifically, but I'm assuming what can the person do from the outside, I guess. Is there any steps they can take if a person's underage?
I mean, I think when it comes to underage, if someone is having suicidal thoughts, then what really matters most is that they get the help that they need. Mm-hmm. And at that point, the age doesn't matter. If you're, let's say you're a young person and your friend is also young and your friend is struggling and you're really scared that they're going to do something, they have expressed to you, like I explained earlier, right? What the less intense to the more intense. Let's say that someone is really more intensely on that side of actually trying to like plan or do something, and you're really fearing for their life. You're scared that they're going to do something. You can talk to them and say that, listen, I think you should go to the emergency room. I think you really need help. Or let's go talk to someone. Let's say this is a younger person and you both go to school together. And I know obviously with COVID, it looks a little bit different right now, being on site and not, but there's always a school counselor in the school. There's a school psychologist. There's a social worker. There is someone on the school property that is able to actually help facilitate someone going into the emergency room. And for this reason. And if that person is willing, so the first thing you need to really do is talk to the person and be like, listen, I'm really worried about you, right? I'm really worried about your safety. I don't want you to do something. I really care about you. Making that person understand that if they did something that would really impact you. And for that, so when we usually assess people, right, we always ask them about protective factors. So protective factors are things that they live for. or people that they live for. You know, so usually they'll say my friends, my family, my loved ones, my cat. You know, they'll be like, these are the reasons for me to live. So when you talk to the person that's going through something, you make them understand that, you know, if you did something to yourself, that would really like devastate me. That would really make me sad. I don't want you to do anything. I really care about you. For that person to like help ground them in that moment. Your parents, oh my God, they would be devastated. You know, please don't do anything to hurt yourself. I think at the very first, like, you want to make that person understand, like, what you're saying is, I'm not taking that lightly. This is having a real impact on me. I'm taking this very seriously. And I really think that you should get help. And if, let's say, the person is not really willing to get help, in that moment, you have to make a little bit of a judgment call. If you're really scared for someone, then you can actually call 911. You can make that phone call and say that, listen, I have a friend or a family member, someone, I'm really scared. I'm really concerned that they're going to do something. They said this and this to me. You report that, and an ambulance shows up and takes that person. And you might say that, okay, they're going to be really angry with me if I do something like this. But you know what? At the end of the day, if you're saving their life, that is more important than any anger that they'll be directing at you in that moment or afterwards. Saving their life is the most important thing. And if you're able to do that in that moment, take those steps, I think that's the most important thing. Like, that's really the bottom line, to get them the help in that moment before they do something to themselves.
Just to follow up on that, I feel like
Yeah.
it might be related. Someone else asked if it's like taboo in the family to get help and they need like therapy, specifically therapy, because they're depressed, but they can't really go alone because they live with their parents and they depend on their parents. Like, what should they do in that situation?
Omar, do you want to take that one?
Sure. So usually one of the biggest barriers to seeking help, unfortunately, is going to be your own family members. And I know that in a lot of more cultural families, like if your parents come from back home and you're born here, not only is there a generation gap, but there's a culture gap on top of that. There's an immigration gap on top of that. There's an age gap on top of that. You could not put more gaps in between your perspective about what you feel you need to get better, in this case, therapy, medications, whatever it may be, and then what your parents think you need in order to get help, in order to get better, or just dismissing it entirely. Your parents not even grasping it or understanding it as a problem or issue. What I would recommend is a few things. First and foremost, if you are over the age of 18, truthfully speaking, nothing is stopping you actually from getting help. You can actually reach out yourself and contact any sort of professional. You can get it on Psychology Today. You can search there. You can search by provider. You can search by location. You can search by insurance. You can even search by faith and see if you want like a South Asian professional or a Muslim professional, and then start emailing and calling offices and setting up appointments. If you have your own laptop or you have your own mobile device, then really that's all you need. Because for appointments now, this wasn't the case pre-corona, but at least now during coronavirus time, all we really need to contact you is just a mobile device or a laptop, because our sessions will be telehealth, meaning we do it over the computer. The only way I can see your parents literally coming in would be if they physically come through the door and close your laptop and stop you from having a session. If this is the case that you're in, where your parents are completely restricting your current environment and you can't seek help at all, then I would say then it comes down to actually explaining to your parents what you're suffering from and what you need help with. So this is actually a way to finesse it, which is understanding that our parents' generation does not understand mental illness the way we understand mental illness. The entire psychological component of health is actually missing from that perspective back home, because back home, there are no words for this. If I told you bipolar disorder, there is no word for this back home. If I told you schizoaffective disorder, there's no word for this. Our parents don't conceptualize it in the same way that we do. So if you need to see a professional, perhaps instead of telling your parents, I am depressed, and having them shut you down on that, maybe describing the physical symptoms you are suffering from, and then saying, I need to see a doctor for this, and then going down that route can actually help you see a professional. You'll see a medical professional first, but when you see that medical professional, you can tell that medical professional, this is what I'm actually going through. This is what I'm doing. And without seeing a psychiatrist, without seeing a therapist, a medical professional can actually prescribe antidepressant medications for you, anti-anxiety medications for you, whatever other type of medications that you need. No, they're not a psychiatrist. I understand that. It's our specialty, but you don't have to be my specialty in order to receive the same kind of treatment. And that primary care doctor can also refer you to a therapist if they need to. So this is one workaround where your parents can see you going to a medical doctor, and then from that medical doctor, then receiving mental health care in that regard. So if the first step is a difficult step for you, try a roundabout way of doing it. Instead of describing depression to your parents, describe the physical symptoms that you're feeling. Describe to your parents that I'm feeling so slow, I'm feeling so fatigued, I feel like I have no energy, I feel like something's wrong with my body. When you know it might be depression, but when you're explaining something's wrong with my body, the first thing any parent would understand is, okay, see the doctor. That's the first thing they would think to themselves. So you go down that route and you do that. That's the second advice I would give. The third advice I would give is to find yourself a sheikh or imam who is mental health positive, meaning that this is an imam or sheikh who understands mental health and mental wellness, and ask that sheikh for advice in either talking directly to you or talking to your parents and telling your parents that this person needs help and this is what I think they need. Oftentimes, for folks who come from back home, they don't respond to clinical authority. What they do respond to is Islamic authority. And for them, they recognize that if the imam gives certain nasiha, if the imam gives certain advice, we're going to listen to that. So if it comes from the imam that you need help, and this is where you go for the help, then yeah, we got it. We'll do it. Whatever you need to do, we'll follow that. So find out what it is, what situation you may be in, and you can use one of these three techniques to help you get the help that you need. So I hope, inshallah, that helps answer that question.
Jazakallah, go ahead. We do have a bunch of questions coming in. We'll try to,
Oh man.
Yeah, I know you guys are tired too. We'll try to get a few in. And we apologize if we're not
We're trying to be more short, I guess.
Yeah.
So someone asked, the severity of real life issues and the feeling of hopelessness was mentioned. Building on that, if your career, for example, a person is a journalist, is dependent on being exposed to atrocious or emotional events, how do you cope with that? Is there a way to separate your emotions from the events?
You want to take this one, Bisma? You want me to?
Yeah, I'll give a short answer. So this is all, something that, we, I could just sort of talk about it as like Omar's work and my own. We are constantly dealing with people who go through a lot of, mental illness. There's a lot of trauma in their life. There's a lot of really, things that, sometimes we hear described to us that are very disturbing, and they are really sad. And those things are, I think it has an impact on us, but I think with certain fields, like this person is talking about journalism, part of your training is to really be able to separate and not continue to carry those feelings and emotions that you might experience in the moment when you're being exposed to something, right? And being able to, put that compartmentalize in a way, so that you can actually continue to function in your own life, because otherwise it's going to be really challenging. So I would say to this person, if you're new in the field, then maybe finding a mentor who can really help you understand what that would look like in your particular field, what that would look like for you to be able to sort of separate yourself from getting too emotionally caught up in the things that you're actually reporting.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of us, like Bisma said, deal with trauma and deal with difficult things. And even for us, you would think to yourself, well, if the therapist is traumatized or the doctor is traumatized and having difficulty, who do they see when they need help? And the truth is, I see a therapist myself. I go and see a therapist 3 times a week. I go to see a therapist myself, and I am a psychiatrist. So I deal with a lot of emotional difficulty. I deal with a lot of trauma, physical trauma, psychological trauma, sexual trauma. Every day in, day out, I deal with that. That's my job. Bisma's job also. And for us, the two of us, we seek help. We also seek help. We reach out to professionals and we get help. For you as a journalist, there's no shame at all in seeing your own therapist or seeing your own psychiatrist. It doesn't mean you're a bad journalist or you're a less journalist or you're a weak journalist. None of that nonsense. You're a journalist dealing with a lot, and sometimes it helps to get some support. You wouldn't be good at your job if this was getting in the way of it. So make sure to get yourself a proper professional who can help support you through it. That's what I'd recommend.
All right. The next question that we had was, how do you recognize that you have mild symptoms of depression as opposed to simply just feeling sad or going through a rough patch? Like a person not sure, are they just going through a rough patch, or is that depression itself? Are there any red flags aside from suicidal thoughts?
So I mentioned in the very beginning about like the fact that it depends on how long you've been experiencing this and what is the severity of it, right? So like I said, the depression can be an emotion. And if it is, then there's like usually a timeline, right? There's usually maybe a few hours, maybe it goes into a few days out of the week, maybe it's a week, but there is sort of like a beginning and end to those feelings and emotions. But if you go for a few weeks where you're continuously feeling depressed, that means that you should seek professional help, and you should, get some kind of either therapy or medication, something to help you. You need help at that point. And also, if you feel like you're unable to actually perform your daily routine, you're unable to actually take care of your daily responsibilities, then that's a red flag.
Mm-hmm. Yep. You want to look for three basic things, like Bisma mentioned. The first is that it affects your work or school. The second is that it affects your relationships with your friends, your family, whoever is around in your life. And the third thing is that it affects your ability to take care of yourself, your daily activities. If it affects one of these three things or all of these three things, it's no longer just a regular normal thing you're dealing with. You've now sort of transitioned into the realm of this being something pathological that you may need professional support for. And like Bisma had also mentioned, the length and severity is not for you to determine, it's actually for us to determine. We are the ones who actually sit you down and actually go through all the questions and situations. And then we tell you, what we feel you're going through, or how intense it is that you're going through, and what our recommendation is for you when that happens. So if you're unsure, you don't really know what it is that you're going through or how intense it is, see a professional anyway. Sit down with a professional, let us tell you what our impression is and what kind of recommendations we have for you.
We'll just take two more if that's okay with you guys.
Sure.
So there's been a few questions regarding the aspect of the affordability, I guess. Some people are saying, are there any networks or resources where people can find therapists? Most students, oftentimes, they can't afford the typical cost of sessions. They need treatments. Is there any network or resource they can access for those type of reasons?
So I'll just jump in and mention a few, and Omar, you can just sort of add, because I do understand the affordability. The first place I would recommend for people to go is to their insurance. Call up your insurance company, go to their website. A lot of these insurance companies have on their website, find a provider. You put in, that you want a therapist or psychiatrist, behavioral health, and then, you put in your zip code or whatever it is, and then it pulls up some options for you, and you start to just, call people and reach out. Another one is Psychology Today, which is a website. It also has listings of therapists and psychiatrists. And you can filter according to your insurance and zip code. Right now, zip code doesn't really matter as much because during COVID, most of the visits are video visits anyway. But that's just sort of like putting that out there for like different times. Also, you want to ask people if you know someone in the field. You want to just maybe ask them for recommendations. Like, do you know anyone who I could see, or do you know anyone who, does this work, who's a therapist or a psychiatrist? So asking people, sometimes that also helps, like having those personal recommendations. There's another website. It's called Good Therapy, I believe. Goodtherapy.com. That's another one. And for students, I know that there are some actually, like, universities have their like mental health, like the students that are training to become therapists, usually like they have a center on their campus where people can be seen on a sliding scale, and it costs less because you're seeing someone who is, you know, still in training. um, so that's also something that you can look up and find for some of the schools.
I mean,
Okay,
for me, I think all I'd recommend
sorry.
is look up your university. If you're a university student, your university usually almost always has counseling services, without a doubt. High school, same thing. High schools are mandated by law to have student counseling services. So always go for student counseling services if the options are available for you through your school, if it's a high school, through your university, if it's a university. If not, like Bitsma mentioned, you can go through your insurance if you need to. The other thing I recommend is to go through university programs. So like my hospital, Nassau University Medical Center, has residents, like trainees like myself, who staff their clinic. Our clinic takes people who have no insurance and people who don't even have citizenship, and our clinic sees them. And we're able to give them a sliding scale fee. Adelphi University, same thing. They have a counseling program there, and you pay a minimum of $20 if you need to have a session with someone. There are plenty of cheap options available for folks. So please don't ever let money be an issue as to why you're not seeking help. Ever don't. And if you're having trouble seeking someone, reach out to a professional, like Bisma mentioned. Like reach out to one of us, and we can connect you to resources that we have, if need be.
Jazakallah khairan, and we'll put your info again up before we end the session. The last question that we'll take for today is, a few people are asking, are there any indications that are different in regards to children? Do they have any separate symptoms or indications that they might be going through depression or anything related to that?
Well, that's a good
Children
question.
specifically.
I think for children, one of the biggest indicators is their school performance. So if there's been a change in their grades, you know, in school, if there's been a change in their behavior in school or with their peers or around their teachers, if anything like that has been noticed in the school setting, usually that's the first indication that there's something that's going on. Obviously, parents can also observe if they see anything in the home, but usually I've seen and, you know, kind of really observed that the issues first start in their school performance.
Yeah, you can also see symptoms like acting out. A lot of kids can become more irritable. Sometimes they become more oppositional, where they're more defiant. You'll notice that their behavior needs to be consistent across the board. What we mean by that is the way they act at home matches the way they act at school, matches the way they act with friends, meaning in every environment, you see your child acting the same way. This usually signifies that something deeper is going on. There's some problem or issue happening here that's affecting them everywhere. Versus if they're one certain way in some certain environment, you probably have to explore that environment first and see what's going on over there, because then it might be more of an environmental factor than something truly within their own mind, like psychological speaking. But the best person to help you determine this, again, I'm going to always keep referencing this, take them to a professional. Have them sit with a child psychiatrist or a psychotherapist that is trained in dealing with children and adolescents, and have them evaluate them. If you feel in your heart that there's a red flag and a problem with the way my child is behaving or acting, and I don't really have like an explanation for it, you know, make sure to take them to a professional for a proper evaluation. And if the evaluation comes back normal and there's nothing, khair, alhamdulillah, fine. Then for you, it's probably just a behavioral issue you got to make sure you take care of. And that's more of a parenting issue rather than an actual mental illness issue. So that's the only 2 cents I would add to Bisma's answer.
Jazakallah khairan. We'll wrap it up with that. We really do appreciate our brother Omar and sister Bisma taking out the time.
Are there a lot of questions left over still?
So I had a few that was sent over throughout the week, actually.
Oh, what I would say is, if you didn't have a chance tonight to have your questions answered, I know you guys are going to give our Instagram thing. I'm comfortable giving mine too for MyGram if you want to ask your questions there. But please, if you did not get your question answered and you want your question answered, I am asking you please to reach out and message, because we want to make sure that everyone here who feels that they need help gets a proper response, inshallah. So I encourage anyone who didn't get their answer tonight, please DM.
For sure, Jazakallah khair. We really do appreciate you guys taking out your time on behalf of the community, on behalf of JMC. We really do appreciate it. I'll just put up where you can reach the Heal Collective in general. You could see them there on Instagram at Heal Collective NY. As Brother Omar mentioned, you could reach out to them over there if your questions weren't answered. You could visit their website as well, healcollectiveny.org, and on Facebook as well, the Heal Collective. Also, I believe Sister Bisma has a podcast, therapychino.com, and I believe that's on Apple Podcasts as well. I'll check it out recently. So those are different ways you can reach our guests. Again, Jazakallah khair for them for taking out their time. And for us, you can follow us at GMC_org, Facebook.com/GMC official, and our YouTube, Jamaican Muslim Center. This event, inshallah, we will put it up on YouTube perhaps tomorrow. So those that were not able to attend or miss it, we'll definitely put it up and you can share it with those. Jazakallah khair again, everyone, for tuning in and taking out the time. Jazakallah khair for our guests. Hope everyone benefited. Until next time, Jazakallah khair. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.